this is back in 1985. This is just telling us that many of the states' obesity wasn't very much of a problem. But as each year goes by, you'd almost think there was some kind of plague gradually creeping through the states and causing this tendency for all of us to develop this thing that we look in the mirror and we say, what is that that's down there by my belt that wasn't there before? Of course, you know what they call that, don't you? That's furniture disease. That's where your chest drops into your drawers. So we've got an awful lot of furniture disease going on these days, and we'd like to ask the question, why? And I'm not going to say this is the only reason, but it is part, I think, of the equation. And hopefully in my discussion we'll see that this is only one part. So I purposefully entitled this presentation Wheat Belly, an Unintended Consequence ? And how many of you know the guy that's in the picture there? Probably does. My name's under it, but that's not me. Now, that kind of looks like a farmer, and he is, in a way. He's kind of a scientific farmer, and we'll get into who he is in just a minute. Okay, so this is where we get on the scale, or we look at ourselves in the mirror, and we say, where did that thing come from, that belly? And some people just call it the pot belly. It's being referred to as a wheat belly. And that's kind of a challenge, you know, because I know several of you here in the room, I mean, we are, after all, the breadbasket of the world here in Kansas. And so to accuse the farmers of doing something like this, that's pretty mean, you know, accusation. But yet, there it is. It's real. And the numbers are quite startling, as we'll get to in just a minute. 68% of Americans, I think they now say 71% of Americans, are overweight. And this seems to be a place where that weight does accumulate. If you are wondering whether or not you're in that 71%, all you really need to do, and actually this measurement may be the most important measurement you can make, more important than your total body weight, is your waist size. Your waist size is more predictive of the potential negative health consequences that can occur than just about any other number. So take note of this, and when you get home, get your tape measures out and be honest with yourself and just say, okay, where am I at now? Am I in a situation to where I'm at risk for a number of other illnesses, which we're going to talk about in just a minute? So there are different kinds of body fat accumulation, and maybe you've heard the question, you know, are you an apple or are you a pear? Here we've got wheat belly, and this is, you know, fruits and vegetables morning. But the pear shape represents, now a lot of women don't like that excess pear shape either, but that's due to estrogen. Whereas the apple shape is due to something called visceral body fat. The pot belly, the wheat belly, the gut, all these, you know, none of us are very fond of this, as if you, I don't have to tell you that. But this apple distribution of fat is due to something called visceral body fat, you know, and it's just right there, and all you have to do is walk around the mall, and it's over 33% of Americans are frankly obese. But anyone who's gaining excess body weight, more often than not, it seems to be showing up in the area around your internal organs. So this is a CT scan of two different people's abdomens, and you can see pretty clearly that on the left here is the typical visceral fat. We all carry some fat in the visceral organs. There's an organ in there called the omentum, and surgeons know they have to move that around a little bit when they're doing internal surgery. But what's happening is that we are preferentially accumulating a lot of this excess body fat in the organs around the abdomen, and this fat is is kind of like a new organ that's generating additional inflammation in the body. If it were just sitting there, it'd be one thing, but it's actually active. It's creating cytokines which are triggering inflammation. People who have excess visceral body fat have elevations in something called the CRP. The CRP is the C-reactive protein, and it's just a marker. You can ask your doctor. As a matter of fact, I encourage people to ask their doctors to get a CRP. The doctors are a little concerned about doing it because most doctors don't really have a good answer as to what to take to make the CRP go down. I mean, some of them will go ahead and put you on a statin drug because statins do have some anti-inflammatory effects. But I think the real answer is that it's a lifestyle question. It's a lifestyle solution, but it's not an easy answer. You know, there's many things that you need to do to deal with this. And if it were an easy answer, we probably wouldn't be having this lecture. You know, there'd be some pill that you could take and your visceral fat would just miraculously dissolve. And you know, the drug companies, by the way, are looking very aggressively to find that pill because it's going to be a blockbuster seller if it ever does come out. The question will be, is it going to be safe? So this is now 2009. I was showing you the progression of the various states. And just to take a minute, if you know, it started out, you know, white was no data, light blue was less than 10% of the state had a BMI greater than 30. A BMI greater than 30, BMI stands for Body Mass Index. Greater than 30 is frank obesity. Anything over 25 is overweight. So 33% of Americans are obese, and the additional about 37%, 38% are overweight. So obviously the person who's obese is overweight already, plus they're obese. And so this is just looking at obese. So obesity in the United States, you know, there's less than 10%. There's none of those left. The light blue is 10 to 14%. There's none of them. Colorado is the lone state that is 15 to 19%. And I think that's progressed. This is 2009. Here we are at 2003. You know it's progressed. And now all these kind of colors, I don't know how it shows up on the monitors, but kind of the yellowish, that's 20 to 24%. That's a quarter of the population. Now all these orange ones, 25 to 29%, this area of the country, right around the Mississippi, that's greater than 30% of that population is, there's 9 states that it's greater than 30% of the population is obese. This has huge, huge, huge implications to our healthcare system, to the costs of healthcare, Medicare. There's, you know, I have several nurses at the hospitals are having to buy new equipment to handle the obesity issue. Obesity is associated with a whole bunch of additional illnesses: diabetes, heart disease, arthritis, joint replacement. Then there's a big effort now to do the bypass, stomach bypass. You know, there's just a lot of additional costs that go along with this. And so a lot of people ask me, Doctor, where do you stand on Obamacare? And I basically say, until we get some of this under control, there's no insurance system that's going to solve this. We're going to try to figure out new ways to pay for a sinking ship, is what I say. And you can't pay for a sinking ship. It's going down. And in this case, it's going up in terms of weight. But we have to be looking at what's causing this epidemic. And I'm sure all of you have asked this question. If you look back at your family albums back in the 50s, and these are just some things, you know, Father Knows Best and the, you know, Jackie Gleason show, you know, he was a little bit overweight. But look, by today's standards, he's kind of pretty good shape. Back then, we thought he was chubby, and he is a little chubby, but man, this is not bad compared to what we're seeing these days at the mall and various places. This is a family portrait. Almost no one in this portrait is overweight. The cheerleaders are here. They're all looking pretty good. But something has drastically changed in the last, let's say, 30 years. Let me just, how many have you noticed that? That something is, people didn't used to be this fat, you know. We maybe had one kid in the class that was, you know, chubby, and he got a lot of hounding and whatnot, but something fundamental is going on here. What is it? And so I'm going to approach this from two perspectives. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about Mr. Norman Borlaug, PhD. He's the guy that with the straw hat and looking at the wheat. And then this William Davis, we're going to come back to Dr. Davis and talk about him in just a second. But Norman Borlaug is a hero. The Atlantic in 1997 called him the forgotten benefactor of humanity. He won the Nobel Prize. He's considered the guy that started the Green Revolution that is believed to have saved millions and millions of lives around the world. And yet, did anyone in the room know who this was? Has anyone heard of Norman Borlaug before? He's considered kind of an agricultural saint. And what was his contribution? He was a Minnesota-trained geneticist that developed the exceptionally high-yielding dwarf wheat, which can give you 10 times the yield of the original einkorn wheat. And we're going to talk about the different types of wheat. But, and wheat, it's everywhere. You know, if you walk down your supermarket aisles, obviously there's the bread aisle. Well, that's all wheat. What about the snack aisle? Well, that's got a lot of wheat there too. The cereal aisle, that's gotten pretty expensive, but yeah, that's all wheat. It's hard to find a box of cereal that doesn't have some wheat in it. You know, Rice Chex, Corn Flakes, Cheerios, but most all of it is wheat blends and whatnot. Even the healthy cereals, the whole grain cereals, they're all pretty much related to wheat. The pasta aisle, yeah, that's wheat. The bakery, all wheat. Frozen foods, if you really read the packages, wheat is pretty much in every package. Why is that? There's two things. If you buy a packaged food, you're very likely to find two ingredients in just about every packaged food. Wheat and what's the other one? Sugar. That's right. And why is that? Because these are two very inexpensive items. And something happened in the 80s that really shifted everything towards wheat and sugar. Back in the 1980s, it was thought, there was some research that came out that basically said that what causes heart disease? Fat. And so we started on the big low-fat movement. Who remembers that? Everything became low-fat. What did they replace the fat with? Sugar and wheat, white flour, because it was at that point starting to get inexpensive as well. So aside from detergents, meats, fruits, and veggies, wheat pretty much dominates the diet. And the grocers and the national food suppliers, they're pretty happy about it because they can buy sugar and wheat very inexpensively. So they can package it at a very low price and sell it at a pretty high price. This is the most consumed Western grain. 20% of all calories that we eat tends to be wheat. I can't remember, were they able to get, what did we have to eat today? I haven't eaten yet. So was it good? Oh, good. I don't know if there was any wheat in it, but no bread. Okay, I was wondering if we were going to get that done. It's hard to, you know, when you start thinking along this line, it's not easy because it's just ubiquitous. That means it's everywhere. And so acreage planted exceeded only by corn. We do grow a lot of corn because we use that in the feedlots. But it's been an unprecedented financial success for the farmers because a nickel's worth of grain can sell for $3.95 box of cereal, and that's a pretty cheap box of cereal these days. Plus, all the major health players, the American Heart Association, the American Diabetic Association, Dietetic Association, the USDA, they all strongly endorse healthy whole grains. So that's why it almost seems like blasphemy that we would even be thinking that, you mean healthy whole grains aren't good for you? Doctor, what are you saying? Stone the guy, you know, sort of thing. But let's look at it. Let's remember, co-learners, keep an open mind. Let's see what we can come up with here. Here's the first question that we have to ask. Are we still eating wheat? And people say, well, of course we're eating wheat. It says wheat on the label. It's growing like wheat. It looks like wheat. It must be wheat. Well, back in 1943, this International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center was established in Mexico City, the CIMYT. And the whole goal of that was a very noble goal. The writing was on the wall. The world population was rapidly expanding, and how are we going to feed all these billions and billions of new people that are coming into the world now? And so it was just a matter of figuring out how to increase the yield of some of these key hunger-relieving crops. And so by 1980, thousands, get this now, thousands of new strains of hybrids of wheat had already been introduced, discovered, and they also found this out for corn as well. So by the time these hybrids are finished, you know, I don't know if you know what hybrid is, where you combine various different strains of wheat in order to adjust for drought or disease resistance or the height to which it grows. You know, you can do all kinds of amazing things these days with hybridization. But as you do, you're starting to shift the genetic structure of the plant. And what's surprising to me, and I have to believe this is true, that the genetic changes in wheat now, the difference between what our forefathers ate, let's say 1950s and before, and what we're eating today, the genetic change, they say, is about 3%, which doesn't sound like much, but that's greater than the genetic difference between a monkey and a human. It's still wheat, but it's genetically very, very different. And if we go back and look at it, it's chromosomally different. The original wheat that we were eating was called Eichhorn wheat, 14 chromosomes. And then when that was cultivated with goat grass, we got emmer wheat, which has 28 chromosomes. And then emmer wheat was cultivated with Triticum tashi, and that became Triticum ostivum, which has 42 chromosomes. That's the wheat of today. But we're going all the way back. You know, wheat was the staff of life. It's, you know, we think in terms of our hunter-gatherer ancestors, and then they were able to begin to cultivate wheat. Probably was one of the very first things that they were able to cultivate as a plant. And they were able to stop migrating, and they could settle down and form culture, society. You know, a lot of our very root, the Egyptians were one of the very first big cultures that developed because of the development of the ability to grow wheat and store it up. So it gave civilization a lot of advantages, and we probably wouldn't be civilized if we didn't have this. But it did. There was some major changes that occurred, and this in the last 40 years since 1980, the big thing is agricultural science has just really ramped up the wheat hybridization. And that's a little bit different than genetic modification, but that's coming too. So we're not even talking about genetic modification yet. We're just talking about hybridization, which is combining two different strains in order to get a new strain in order to achieve certain results. For example, all these offspring of the Triticum ostivum, which are human bred, they have a tenfold greater yield than a century ago, and it was a fantastic achievement. They're disease resistant, they're drought and heat resistant, they're shorter and sturdier. The seeds are less clingy, so when you go about harvesting, it's easier for the equipment to get the seeds off the stalk. They mature faster, and the quality of the actual flour is finer, so we're able to do amazing things in the bakery. I mean, you know, there's no question that we can do some wonderful things with the flour that we have these days. And we really owe all of that to Norman Borlaug. He won the 1970 Nobel Peace Prize for his contribution to modern agriculture. He was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the Congressional Gold Medal. He developed the high-yielding dwarf wheat. And the reason that's such an important development, you know, in America the Beautiful, amber waves of grain. How many of you have seen amber waves of grain recently when you drive past? Not anymore. You don't see amber waves of grain anymore because those really high waving grains, if you tried to use a lot of extra nitrogen and really this high-powered fertilizer that we have these days, yes, the head of the grain plant would get very big, but it would get so big that it would break at the very top. It would literally break its neck, and it would kill that particular plant. And so Norman Borlaug's contribution was to hybridize the wheat such that you had a nice short stalk that was sturdier, and it took less of the growing power of the plant to grow a short stalk that was sturdier, and then the plant could then use the rest of that nutrition from the earth and the fertilizers to grow the big heavy head, and the shorter, sturdier stalk would hold that heavy head, which had a much higher yield, 8 to 10-fold yield. That's a lot. That's a lot, and the farmers really did appreciate it. It's easier to cultivate. It's more drought resistant, all these things that I showed you earlier. So agriculturally, it was a huge advance, and it spread all over the world. You know, his development wasn't just something for here in the United States. China, India, you know, all the countries of the world are using the high-yielding dwarf wheat. It's 99.7% of wheat that's available. You can still get the older wheats, by the way. If you are really interested in testing this out for yourself, you can go online and get Eichhorn wheat. There are people that are still growing it. If you think that, well, I wonder if I can eat that other wheat, the more the ancestral, I call it the ancestral wheat, and see if it affects me like this modern wheat does. So we look at the consequences of these developments, and the intended consequences that have come to be is that we feed the world better. The world is now getting fed very well. We're preventing starvation, we're improving yields per acre, and we've increased the profits per acre, which is good. But the unintended thing that, and I'm not preaching, you know, a direct. All I can say is there's some associated things that have happened since this wheat has been introduced, and we can't pin it all on just the wheat. But there are some interesting things to think about here. Worldwide obesity epidemic, rising rates of diabetes, healthcare systems in complete overload. Every country that has even the socialized healthcare systems. I'm on several boards up in Canada, and yes, they have socialized medicine, but they're straining under the load as well. National economies devastated by skyrocketing healthcare costs. Well, we're getting there. We're getting there. This slide kind of paints the picture. Back in the year 2000, the red column are the percentages of diabetes of the populations. And then this is what they're predicting by the year 2030. This is from the New England Journal of Medicine, so it should be a pretty good statistic. But these are percentage increases over that 30-year period, 164%, 162%. For those of you that are health practitioners, diabetes is perhaps the most expensive illness you can have. Heart disease, increased risk of cancer, leg amputations, eye problems, you know, neuropathy, debilitation, disability, all kinds of things happen as a result of diabetes. It's nothing to, it's bad. And yet here we have this forecast of great increases in the demand upon the world healthcare system by virtue of the fact that the obesity epidemic is well underway. And so this just shows, since 1976, the graph down the bottom, this shows the evolution of obesity, and it's, I mean, it's kind of supposed to be kind of a comic thing. It's not funny though. We're having a serious problem develop. It may be one of the most devastating problems that has faced mankind yet, and it seems like, wait a minute, it's a problem of having too much, not having enough. All prior to this, we were running out of things. Now we've got too much of something that is greatly affecting our health. And the other part of it is the sense of helplessness that most people feel in the face of this problem. How many of you have found that once you have developed the gut, it ain't easy to get rid of it? It just ain't easy. I'm thinking of the little story I heard where the doctor was talking to the patient. They were going over the problem list, and the doctor was just ready to leave the room, and he looks back and he says, "And you need to lose 40 pounds." And he walks out of the room. You know, no solution, no suggestion. And the patient looks out the door. "So do you." So, because very often the healthcare practitioner themselves are struggling with this. So it's not that we don't know better. It's just that, gosh, you know, no matter what we try to do, it's a problem. So our ancestral genes are having a tough time dealing with all these grains. And they're very, very addictive. And I'm going to show you why in just a second. So enter Dr. William Davis. I don't know when this book came out. I think it came out about 2 or 3 years ago. It's been a bestseller. And he is a cardiologist, a preventive cardiologist. And what he noticed is he had a lot of his patients coming in, and these people were doing everything. They were jogging, and they were eating really good foods, including their healthy whole grain breakfasts. You know, lots of fiber. You know, because fiber's good, and they were, you know, trying to meditate and do all the good stuff to take care of themselves, and yet they were pretty chunky. They just couldn't lose the weight. And not only that, their cholesterol was really bad, and they were getting pre-diabetic in spite of doing all these things. And he himself was running into this very same problem. He was getting diabetic, and he was a cardiologist. He knew better. He said, "Gosh, you know, what in the heck is going on here?" And he undertook this research of wheat, wondering, this seems to be a common denominator. And so I'm not going to be able to go through everything in the book with you, and I really would encourage all of you who are struggling with this to at least read the book. Give the guy a chance. Now, not everyone agrees with him. I don't think anyone agrees on anything anymore. I mean, I find that the world is pretty contentious. But I kind of tell people, hey, give it a read. Try it. If it makes sense to you, try it. I had a dentist come in, and he slammed the book on my desk, and he says, "You've got to get every patient to read this book." And I say, "Well, why?" And he says, "I have not been able to lose any weight. Prior to this, I was always tired. I was always hungry. I couldn't think. I couldn't sleep. I was so sick, and all I did was give up wheat, and now I feel so much better." So I said, "Well, I'll do my best." I try to encourage the co-learner perspective, and if something seems to be working, and I would have to say part of the reason I'm giving the talk is because my wife turned out to be gluten sensitive, and she says, "Dear, we have to go off of wheat." And I said, "Oh gosh, we love, who in here doesn't love wheat? Come on, show me someone that doesn't love wheat." And I mean it's kind of like a friend of mine I used to run with. He said if you could give him the cigarette that didn't cause disease, he'd start smoking tomorrow. I'm not a smoker, but you know, it's the same sort of thing. If you really love something, you know, you want to keep it up. And I think we love wheat, and there's a reason why we do. But this is the question you're coming down to: is this the issue? I mean, is it worth it? Is the thing I'm having to ask people. So we're not talking about wheat anymore. We're talking about something else. And this is my point that I'm going to go into, and we're going to open this up for discussion. So for one thing, the more ancient wheat, the emmer wheat, which is halfway down the list there, had 28% protein in it. The new hybrids only have 10%. So what happened to that other 18%? Well, these hybrids contain super carbohydrates. These are long chains of branching glucose units that's called amylopectin A. It's a high carbohydrate. Now, for a long time, I used to tell people this is a complex carbohydrate. Like, okay, it's complex, like it's going to take a lot longer for your body to digest it, and so it must be good. It's a complex carbohydrate. But it turns out that it is not any better than sucrose. What is sucrose? Yeah, glucose plus fructose. And so 2 slices of whole wheat bread are glycemically worse than drinking a can of Coke or cola or pop, which has 11 teaspoons of sugar, and they themselves are pretty bad because they contain fructose, and I'm not, that's a whole nother lecture. Fructose may be the other side of this coin. We may be living in what some people have called the perfect storm of poor dietary foods. One person said if we had a mad scientist that set about to design the worst food culture possible that would be hardest on human beings' physiology and metabolism. We've got it. We're here. He was successful. Maybe the communists were succeeded. I don't know who did it, but someone created a system that people get addicted to the foods. How many of you saw Super Size Me? Remember that movie? The guy that ate for one solid month all of his meals at a famous fast food restaurant. Won't name names, but he gained like 30 pounds in 1 month. And he you know what? And his wife was a health food person. He was a health food person, but he did this as a kind of a documentary type of thing. And he said by the end of the month, he really liked it. He said, boy, I want it. And so these kinds of foods are quite addictive. The fructose, by the way, is highly inflammatory to your liver, and it does cause an inflammation of the liver called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And I was very surprised to find out a couple weeks ago up in Canada that the new estimation is that 40% of Americans now have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Because as you start gaining weight and your body overloads with sugar, you overload the liver and it processes it in the same, alcohol is a sugar. So if you're eating things like wheat and sugar and things that convert to sugar in your liver, you can overload it and you're going to get steatosis, which is just fatty liver. And pretty soon it's going to get worse, and that's non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. And if you let that go on, you're going to eventually develop cirrhosis. So not only do we have people who are getting overweight and having all the other problems, livers are going to start failing as well. So these are some serious problems. So the glycemic index. So the glycemic index is a way that has been developed by developed at the University of Toronto, which you take any food and you do a glucose tolerance test with that food. So for example, a glucose tolerance test is where you take 100 grams, I think, or so many grams of glucose. You take that all at once, and then you measure your blood glucose level over like a 3-hour, 4-hour period of time. Well, you can do that with corn. You can do it with peas. You can do it with lentils. You can do it with any kind of fruit or vegetable, and you can get the area under the curve and compare that to glucose and give it a glycemic index. It tells you how much and how fast the carb content of that particular food is being absorbed. And so whole wheat bread, the glycemic index is 72, white bread is 69, Snickers is 41. Now for some people that'll be good news. I'm not really recommending that you go out and eat a lot of Snickers. I do tell people that nuts may be the new health food, and that's a whole other lecture as well. But the wheat-induced blood sugar surges take you on a glycemic roller coaster ride. Think about what a lot of people have for breakfast: coffee with sugar and a donut. Or a lot of kids these days are having a Coke and a Pop-Tart. Or they're having toast and a bottle of pop or something like that. And all this is just causing these ups and down blood sugars. And when your blood sugar is down, you really just don't feel very good at all. So when you eat wheat, or if you eat a high sugar diet, you can expect a blood sugar high followed by a hypoglycemic low. And if you're feeling low, what relieves that? More sugar. And so that's why Dr. Pepper, they don't have this anymore, but they remember the 10, 2, and 4? That's when your blood sugar used to be low, so you could drink another Dr. Pepper or have a Dr. Pepper, and that'll fix it. So this is just what you see with a glucose tolerance test. And the low number here is someone who's hypoglycemic. They'll get down into the 60s, 62, 61. And so when you're that way, this is how you feel. You can be having a headache, you can feel sweaty, shaky, dizzy, not thinking very well, very grumpy. Very often if you have kids that are irritable, they're probably having low blood sugar because they had too much sugar or too much wheat or too much something that has put them on the roller coaster. And if you do that over and over again, it wears out your adrenals. A lot of people who are tired all the time are actually eating high glycemic foods, and they're on this roller coaster ride, and several times a day they're hitting these low spots right over here. And when you're blood sugar is low, your brain panics. It literally panics and sends out this signal to your liver to release glycogen. You know what the signal is that it sends out? Adrenaline. You have an adrenaline surge and you start feeling shaky, and it's the fight or flight response. And so if you have 2 or 3 of these a day, your poor adrenals are kind of wore out by the end of the day. So sugar and high glycemic foods are very fatiguing. So this may be one clue as to why we have so many people. You start talking to people, people are tired. There's a lot of people walking around tired. You really have to get control of your blood sugar before you can start to have the energy that you really need to do what you need to do. Since we were late starting, I won't be able to show you this. This is worth going on YouTube. If you type in A Beautiful Mind or Russell Crowe, you can see what insulin shock looks like. And of course, this is an extreme case. This is it's where they purposefully give him insulin. He's schizophrenic, and they purposefully give him insulin to put him into an insulin convulsion. And we don't usually get people convulsing, though I think I've seen some kids that are almost to that point when they get low on blood sugar. But anyway, you can do insulin shock therapy on your own. Talk about wheat belly. Kind of an interesting juxtaposition. It's a bagel belly, yeah, bagel belly. Bagel belly. And then the people down, the 2 little pictures down below, these are students who have had too much sugar, and this is a lady that's had a little bit too much sugar, and she's having a hypoglycemic reaction. So wheat is nutritional crack. The genetic structure of glutens in modern wheat hybrids has changed. There's been an increase in the gliomorphic polypeptides. I don't know how many of you know that, but there are these peptides in wheat that are very similar to endorphins. And this is why people literally get hooked on wheat. And some people get very shaky. Matter of fact, if you try to go off of wheat, I always tell people, expect 2 or 3 days of having withdrawal, where you'll feel either anxious or headachy or irritable or depressed or especially tired, not sleeping very well. So these molecules mimic addictive opiate drugs. So the food industry loves this because both sugar and wheat are very addictive. They're very addictive, and it sells product. I used to think that the evil empire was maybe some of the pharmaceutical companies who were trying to get us on all these various medications, and now I'm beginning to think the food companies are in on this somehow. Anyway, am I getting paranoid, or I don't know? Help, the paranoids are out to get us. The hypoglycemic roller coaster. So what happens when people are on this roller coaster for years and years, and it's not unusual. You know, if you think about it, if you look back on your life and what you typically eat for breakfast, what you use for snacks, what you have for lunch. I mean, think of a kind of I don't know if this is a typical breakfast, but you know, a lot of people will have a cup of coffee and a donut, and then mid-morning they'll run to the snack room and have cookies or something like that, or a cinnamon roll. And it's not unusual then to have a sandwich and a Coke for lunch and have some ice cream afterwards, and then in the afternoon you need another cup of coffee or something like that, and then you know, it's pasta for supper, ice cream afterwards. You know, it's not hard to live a high carbohydrate lifestyle in America because it's there, and it's all the convenience foods. If you go into a convenience store, you're talking high carbohydrates. If you're trying to be wheat-free, it ain't easy. And so that's one of the problems with this whole issue, is that our culture does not support this. You have to really work at it and discover alternatives if you want to go this route. But over the years, your cells become insulin resistant from all these ups and downs. The high wheat can end up causing high insulin. That's type 2 diabetes. The insulin is what causes you to store fat. You store carbohydrates as fat. And this is where it goes, is the visceral body fat. Visceral body fat can equal either wheat belly or sugar belly. You know, sugar will do it too. And that will then result in the non-alcoholic liver disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, you know. Matter of fact, these are all the unintended consequences. So in the book, Wheat Belly, Dr. Davis, in the various chapters, presents a lot of research data connecting wheat to all of these chronic diseases. And so for those of you that are on medicine for these things, that's fine, you know, and thank God for medicine. But here at the Riordan Clinic, what we try to do is look for underlying causes. And as I said at the beginning, I don't know for certain that this is the whole, as a matter of fact, I know this is not the whole answer. I think you have to take a comprehensive view of each patient that I see. We look at all the various possibilities. But when people come in with these chronic illnesses, we're looking at lifestyle changes they can make that can reduce their risk and improve their overall quality of life. And interestingly enough, that's what Dr. Davis found when he asked people to do 2 weeks off of wheat. He said, try it. He says, don't listen to me. I mean, what do I know? I'm just a cardiologist. I've written a book, but you know, I've gotten all this research. But you know, it goes against the grain to talk this way. Sorry for the pun. It goes against the grain to start bad-mouthing wheat in Kansas. But nevertheless, we've got this darn obesity epidemic staring at us, and no one seems to know what to do. Maybe the answer is sitting right in front of us, literally in front of us. And we need to be willing to ask the question, could it be? Maybe I'll just give it a try. You know, I think it's kind of nice now and then to kind of shake up your dietary habits. We all get stuck in certain patterns of eating. Try going wheat-free for a week or two and see how you feel, see how you sleep, see what happens to your energy levels, see what happens to your cravings, see how much you eat. Because I've been surprised how little I need to eat by virtue of being wheat-free. Okay, the American Heart Association's endorsements of healthy whole grains is intended to lower heart disease risk. Instead, there is this unprecedented rise in obesity with all of its grim outcomes. The worst part about it is people who are overweight really don't want to be. Anyone here know anyone that's overweight that wants to be overweight? And then but we'll say to ourselves, well, if they just had more self-control. There's a lot of people that are struggling with this issue. They're very ashamed. They're in a state of despair. They've tried diets. Many times they'll lose weight, but then if they go back to their old eating habits, back to the cultural eating, the weight comes back with a vengeance. And so they dig the hole deeper. Was this Norman Borlaug's intent? Well, absolutely not. It would be ridiculous to think that someone who was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize had any intentions for this to happen. How would he have known that 34% of Americans would be obese, pre-diabetic, or frankly diabetic? So I don't think that's the issue at all. He was just trying to help improve the yield of an important crop that we all revered. I mean, wheat is revered. You know, it is almost sacred. It is sacred in many religions. So here we are, but this is what we got to deal with. So what do we do? And I'm just here to say there is no easy answer. I mean, even the business about trying to go off of wheat and try it for a while, that's fine. You try it. I think there's more to it than that, but it's one of the pieces of the puzzle that you can investigate for yourself to see if it makes a difference in your life. And you have to ask the question, if you have a belly, is the wheat worth it? Can I live without it? Are there alternatives that are healthier for me? One of the side benefits of going off wheat is you start discovering a whole lot of new foods that maybe you haven't been eating, because a lot of the convenience foods contain wheat, and so you'll have to start thinking more inconveniently, but nevertheless it's possible. So I don't think there's an easy answer. I don't think the government's going to save us. I don't think you can legislate health. You know, what was the mayor of New York wanted to cut down on the size of soda pop, and there's a big outcry. You know, people love their addictions. I mean, that's what an addiction is. And so I think it's going to be each and every one of us is going to have to look at this and try some of this and see if it's going to be helpful to you or not. So my slogan is true healthcare reform is self-care reform. And so here at the Riordan Clinic, what I've done is developed a 17-part way of 17 correctable causes of chronic illness. And I did put the word wheat down here under the word candida. We see a lot of people who have yeast overgrowth in their digestive systems, but yeast feeds off of sugar. And so I think wheat may be one of the contributing factors there as well. But certainly people who have many of the chronic problems I've alluded to, they have a lot of chronic inflammation. So this is one of the ways you can at least investigate as reducing the inflammation in your body. Inflammation seems to be kind of at the core of many of the health problems that people have. If you count these little triangles, there are 16 in the big delta. I call it the Riordan delta. And the reason I call it the Riordan delta is because delta means change. And the definition of insanity is doing things the way you've always done them and expecting something to change. And that's why you have to be willing to at least try some different ways of living your life if you hope to change for the better. But the big delta here is you. And so I always tell patients, you're the first cause. You're the one that's going to make something stick. Don't wait for the government to save you. Maybe there might be a drug that comes along that helps get rid of visceral fat. But even that, you know, most drugs have they have side effects and they have limitations as well. So in general, this can be a stepping stone to better health if you're willing to look into it. And so I encourage all of you to at least consider the fact that maybe your body doesn't do very well with the modern wheat, and see whether or not you can improve your health by at least limiting it. I like what I call the 80-20 rule. 80% of the time, try finding alternatives, and every now and then you're going to be in situations where a little bit of wheat can be utilized and probably not slow you down that much, but that's up to you. Well, hey, I want to thank all of you for coming today. I encourage all of you just to take steps towards taking better care of yourself, because if you don't, no one else will. Thank you.